All right, peeps, on today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, I'll be talking to Hong Kong film legend Bey Logan about the career of the late, great Richard Norton. Lots of gems, lots of sheep stories, lots of painful. Let's get to it.
And every day, I practice martial arts. Watch out!
All right, everyone. Well, I'm very excited to have my good friend Bey Logan here for another episode of the Kung Fu Genius podcast. This time, we're going to do a tribute to the late, great Richard Norton, for whom Bey was very close to, and he's going to share lots of great stories, and we're going to have a retrospective about his amazing career. So thank you so much for joining us, and let's get to it.
Always a pleasure. Here we are, Thursday evening here in Manana, my lovely home on Lantau, where the letters KFG was here are still spray painted on the bathroom wall.
Hey, I wasn't the one who did it, so I'm
I know
not
it was
saying
one of
anything.
your students, but still, but no, it's thank you for giving me the opportunity to come up, because I think one of the ways to process the loss of somebody who was as close as Richard after the immediate shock of it is what I love to do is to tell stories about how wonderful the guy was, to kind of keep the memory and the awareness of him, current and alive and relevant. Even though physically he's moved on to the next stage of life, but I mean, it's for me, it's a great part of the process to be able to come on and talk with you about him.
Sure, absolutely.
So,
And his
'cause I mean,
favorite catchphrase, his famous catchphrase was painful. And
Painful.
I also saw
Painful.
someone post, after he passed away, it said painful. Yes,
Yeah.
the loss
I
of
put it at the
Richard
end of
Norton is very painful.
I put it at the end of my obituary. I said, painful. My son, Ryan, who you know well, he used to say that every time he kicked somebody or whatever, painful. It was like his thing.
So I
But
think
yeah,
that
so I mean,
go
yeah.
ahead. I was going to
No,
say,
I
I think the amazing thing about Richard Norton's career was that it wasn't just that he had done films; he had done so many things in
Oh my
his
God.
life that it's really incredible. And I think what a lot of people may not know is that you actually have like a familial relationship with Richard. Maybe you could talk about
Oh,
that a
very
little
much
bit.
so. And I mean, I just think the amazing thing about Richard was the fact that and one of the things that gives me so much kind of comfort is he lived 5 lives in one. So you really can't say that he didn't make the best of time he was given. Obviously, we'd like it to have been even more, but he made the best of every day that he was here for. And definitely, and I take as we know now, he passed very quickly. And I think the idea of him having any long-term debilitating ailment would have been very unfair. So if this had to happen, I think this is probably the better way for it to occur.
Sure.
But I grew up with him as part of our extended family because my father, Tino Severano, who was my mum's husband in Australia, was the father of Australian karate, and they ran a very successful dojo, the first of its kind in Australia, Melbourne, Australia. And this lanky blonde teenager came in and started training, and this was Richard Norton. And so I knew of him throughout my, formative years, and he was kind of I've always been the big brother of our family. In my adoptive family in England, I had a younger brother, and I'm the oldest of the Australian siblings. So Richard probably, for the length of my life and career, filled that role among other people, but he was like a big brother figure to me because he'd been my father's instructor. Now, just to delve for a moment into Australian karate politics, he was something of a prodigal son because there was the first generation of Tino Severano Goju Ryu karate students in Australia. And there was a guy called Bob Jones, who was a big, larger than life character. I think he formed his own style called Zendo Kai. And he lured away a lot of the young, promising karateka to follow him. And Richard was one of them. And one reason for this was that Bob had this idea that he wanted to take on security work, bouncer work, door work, and make money doing that, and also test if martial arts technique would work in real life encounters. He also wanted to take on bodyguarding work for visiting rock stars when they were touring in Australia. Now, the ostensible thing was, well, we're going to go out there and use our martial arts to protect people, and we're going to see if it really works in a kind of combat situation. I also think that these young larrikins, they knew that's where the hot girls were, frankly. They knew that if you went to a rock, if you were protecting the Rolling Stones, there's going to be hot and cold running chicks and what have you. My father at the time, Tino, was a staunch traditionalist, and he didn't believe that karateka should take on door work. They shouldn't be bouncers. They shouldn't be hobnobbing with rock stars, which is kind of ironic because his daughter, my sister Kate, would become Australia's greatest rock star, Kate Severano. But at the time, Dad felt a martial artist should be focused on doing that. And Richard did have another job. He was actually, I don't know if you ever seen that series, Port of Call, when they're going to Australia and they're trying to take the bags through the airport. He was the guy doing that. He was the customs guy. He was a customs guy at the airport and doing karate. So you can see from that the idea of, boy, I'm going to be bodyguarding Fleetwood Mac and ABBA. He's in ABBA the movie, bodyguarding those guys.
Wow, I didn't
And
realize that.
so he kind of left with Bob Jones. And he was something of a black sheep, prodigal son. Later, he and Tino reconciled, and I had maybe some small part play in that. And then from then on, he was very much part of the extended family, and we were really close. I mean, the thing about Richard was, I mean, I'm a huge music aficionado, and the music of that era, all the people that he was bodyguarding, all the people he was working with, were figures who musically I was much impressed by. I mean, when they were David Bowie and Richard Norton and the Rolling Stones and all these people toured Australia, he was the guy who was taking care of them. And he was also such an extraordinary, amiable, affable figure that when Chuck Norris, the American karate kid movie star, comes to Australia to do a tour promoting his movies and doing demonstrations, he met Richard and they developed such a bond that he says to Richard, look, if you ever think about moving to LA, move to America, I think you could work in film, come and look for me and I'll set you up. So, duly, Richard made the move to the States and kind of like started working with Chuck. And the first movie that I'm aware of him being in is interesting. It's called The Octagon. Have you guys seen that one?
Oh, absolutely. I
Chuck
loved
Norris
that movie
ninja
as a
movie.
child. Yeah.
Right. And Richard had focused on the Japanese weapons, the Okinawan weapons. So he was really good with the sai, with the katana, with the bow, with the kama, with all those Japanese weapons. And they'd had a hard time finding an imposing looking Asian Pacific to play this. I think the guy's name is Kyo. He's masked. He's wearing like a kendo mask and a kind of it has a slit where they've darkened. I mean, I don't think anybody looks less Asian than Richard Norton, but they darkened his eyes and everything. And that's him in this outfit. He's the Darth Vader. He's the enforcer of the bad guy. Right. And he has a big fight with Chuck at the end. And that was his first. Then he's also in the movie as himself. And at the time, he was bodyguarding. He continued to do bodyguarding work in America. And he was bodyguarding and training the late John Belushi. Because Belushi was a big martial arts enthusiast and actually trained with a lot of people like Bill Wallace. And,
in fact,
so he was training.
In fact, wasn't it Bill Wallace who found
Correct.
Who found his John Belushi's body, right?
Yeah. He'd overdosed.
Yeah.
But Richard was training John Belushi, and he says, "Yeah, we've got this scene where I just come in and Chuck's going to kick me in the nuts. What should I do?" And Belushi goes, "You should go, or just do this thing where you do a slow turn around and fall down, like somebody that's really been kicked in the nuts, not like a typical martial arts guy. You took it like a mat." Oh man! So if you look at the movie, and this is cue a clip, you see Chuck gives him a good kick in the nads, and Richard does the John Belushi reaction. So we always credited John for that. And there were some interesting crossovers between the martial arts and the music world. Another great idol of mine musically, James Taylor, was somebody that he was bodyguarding. And then really unusually, a lot of these people then became his student. And he was always very proud, Richard, justifiably, of the fact that James Taylor, I don't think it's any secret, had a terrible heroin problem for a long time. And obviously has something of an addictive personality. And Richard got him hooked on rope skipping and the Joe, the short staff. And so every day he had to do that. And he was acknowledged as one of the people that really helped James Taylor in his recovery.
Wow.
The first time I remember Richard having any significant screen time, away from those, he had some brief moments in Chuck Norris films, was a film called Force 5, which was one of the many attempts by the director Robert Clouse to capitalize on the success of the Bruce Lee film Enter the Dragon. So it's basically, if you watch Force 5, it's the same story as Enter the Dragon, but it's Joe Lewis as the lead guy and a team, the crack team of, and it's more, obviously, guess how many there are? Guess. 5. And one of them is Richard, who's using weapons and what have you. And he told a story. Maybe I don't want to say the guy's name because I don't want to, but a guy in America, famous American ninja master, who was working on that film, and he said that Richard at some point had to throw a shuriken, the throwing stars, and this American ninja master was like, "Oh, I'm concerned." He met him in the car park after and said, "Richard, I know you got the scene coming up where you're going to be throwing these shuriken. I'm kind of concerned that you may not do it properly." So the Richard goes, "Sure, fine, show me." So the guy picks out a tree, picks up a shuriken, throws it, completely misses the tree, and dives off into the underbrush to try to find his shuriken. Whereupon Richard drove away. But anyway, you know what? For the members, I will reveal the name of that American ninja master. I think a few people might have a clue, but I'm not going to say it. I don't want to.
I was thinking it's Ashita Kim, but
yes, could be with that. The ski mask. Right?
Hey everyone, just want to let you know Wing Chun Illustrated is now offering a paperback edition through Amazon, reaching a larger global market. And no, they're not ditching the glossy magazine edition through MagCloud. You can now simply choose the version of this magazine you prefer and the one with the cheapest shipping wherever you live. Order your copy of Wing Chun Illustrated today across 12 Amazon marketplaces with free shipping for Prime members. Go and check that out.
And so he was a constant presence in American movies, but like in supporting roles. But he got discovered by the Filipino action film industry and a director called Roberto Santiago, who kind of brought Richard to the Philippines, and they launched him as this. And have you ever seen the Filipino ad campaign? But they would say, Robert Redford's younger brother, as you've never seen him, or Sylvester Stallone's the only man to defeat Jean-Claude Van Damme in a kickboxing competition. It would be these outrageous things. And Richard became a bona fide star in the Philippines and was doing these pictures over there and going in. But I guess that kind of, and also sometime after that was training the actor Michael Dudikoff for American Ninja, which was also shot in the Philippines.
Oh, that's right.
So he was geographically extraordinary. He's a guy from Australia, went to America, was training with Chuck Norris and taking care of bodyguarding there, went to the Philippines to both be a star in his own right and to choreograph the canon movies being made in the Philippines. And then movie-wise, of course, the next thing everybody knows about is him working with Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, and everybody in Hong Kong. And the way that came about is there was a guy who everybody at Golden Harvest met when they made Enter the Dragon, and his name was Pat Johnson. And he's the guy, at the beginning, he kind of like has an interaction with John Saxon's character.
It's the dough, Roper. We got to break something.
Got to break something. You got it? Right. That's the guy. And he was a black belt in the Chuck Norris karate school system. He's the referee in Karate Kid and what have you. But he was the go-to guy. So every time you see an American martial art champion in a Hong Kong film, in a Golden Harvest film, and you ask how that guy got cast, what happened is somebody at Golden Harvest rang Pat Johnson and said, who have you got next? Who have you got next? And the first time they considered Richard was for a movie called Wheels on Meals, Fight and Tear, which was shot in Barcelona. And it ended up being Benny Akides and Keith Vitale, which I think is good casting because they both look like they could be Spanish, because obviously everybody in the movie is meant to be Spanish apart from the Chinese heroes, right? So at that time, Richard was touring with Linda Ronstadt, and Pat Johnson calls and says, hey, Jackie Chan wants you to do this movie. And of course, Richard was like, but then he said to me later, he said, it would have been a bit odd. I would have been the one very blonde, unless they made him wear a wig or something. I'd be the blonde, blue-eyed guy in the middle of all of these Hispanic-looking people, including Benny. So then it was Keith Vitale, and it wasn't Richard. But he was then on some kind of Pat Johnson created database at Golden Harvest. And I almost feel it was like, the what do you call it? The one-arm bandit. What do you call those?
Like the slot machine. Yeah,
exactly. Who's gonna be in this movie? Chiu, and it comes up Benny Akides and Keith Vitale. Chiu, and it comes up Benny Akides and Richard Norton, whoever it was going to be.
Right.
So then for was it Boxing? Some are Lucky Stars. They were like, well, we want to have a team of 3 guys, and one of them is Yasuaki Karate, who's Japanese, one of them is Chong Fat, who's Chinese, and one of them is a very blonde, kind of, it looks like he's the lead singer from a new age band. And that's going to be, it looks a bit like Luc Besson, actually, styling, young Luc Besson. And that's Richard. So he did his first stint working on a Hong Kong movie on Lucky Stars, and he knew who Jackie was. And if you watch the movie, there's an encounter early in the film where they fight, and it's actually shot in the back alleyway behind Golden Harvest Studios, and it ends with Richard kind of like getting the better of Jackie and then running away. And the idea was that at the end of the film they would fight again, and Jackie then would win. But Jackie was injured working on another picture at the same time. So by the time they came to shoot the ending, which is all set supposedly like a YMCA coffee shop, Samo says, okay, so we'll kind of like, we'll work around Jackie's injury, but I'll have the main fight with Richard. And of course, then steps up Richard, looks at this guy, and he didn't really know who Samo was. And I actually think of that era, unless you were a diehard Hong Kong kung fu film aficionado, you didn't know who Samo was. Other than if maybe you saw him at the beginning of Enter Dragon, when he was a lot skinnier than he ended up when he would be at the time of Lucky Stars. Mm-hmm. So then he gets on there and, starts doing things with Richard. Richard's told this story many times, but I mean, it bears repeating that Samo in his, broken English, you take chair, you swing, you hard, swing, power. And Richard goes, okay, I swing the chair at you. And what are you going to do? And Samo says, I'm going to flip off the table over your head. And of course, Richard's like, okay, when's the double get here?
Right.
Because an equivalent builded guy in America is no way going to flip off a table.
Sure.
But then they do it, and then he does it. And Richard's like, then they cut, he's like, and then they do a couple more takes. And then they get into it, and he told me, Richard, it was in the height of the Hong Kong summer, and it was like a sauna. And he said, if I can get through this, I can get through anything. And of course, when he kicks Samo, he gets to say his classic line, painful. And I always asked, like, did you think of that, Richard? Did somebody on the set think of it? And he remembered that they had an English-speaking assistant director. I think it might have been Fruit Chan, who later became a director of Tan Guo, or one of the other guys who came in, and he just said something like, can you say something to acknowledge the fact that Samo's in pain? And you say something like, does that hurt? Or how did that feel? What was the taste of that like? And then finally they got to painful. And Richard said, let's just say that. So it was a combined effort, and that became his catchphrase, painful. And then, but they would, and I think one of the reasons he won everybody's respect is, unlike some other karate champions, he could easily adapt what he did in real martial arts, bodyguarding, kata, into Hong Kong film combat. And he was really game, because no one hits harder in this game, in this business, in his day, than Sammo Hung. But he wouldn't sucker punch anybody. He would just say, can I hit you? And then Richard was like, okay. And, he said, like, when he got kicked by Sammo, and he would like go back through the air like a Q-clip, like an octopus going back through the water, with the legs trailing behind. And it was just brutal. But he earned the respect of all the guys. So that after that, I mean, he was the most consistently pulled back, foreign actor, time and time again, for films with Jackie Chan, with Sammo Hung, Wong Jing, and he was in this big epic Eastern Western that Sammo Hung did called Shanghai Express, where he's partnered with his main on-screen dance partner, the American Forms champion Cynthia Rothrock, and they play which arm? They're from the Civil War. What the blue ones were? What they were, the Union, right? Were they? Yeah, the Confederates were gray.
Yes. No, but that wasn't the. Well, actually, yes, yeah. So sometimes I get the Revolutionary War, where you guys were all in red, which was by the way, the Brits dressing in red was a really good call. No, yeah, I think you're right. The Civil War, I think, yeah, they're I'm getting the middle finger from Mikey over here. Sorry, I realize I'm outnumbered in yeah. So anyway, let's go back.
So the Civil, yes, quite right too. So it was they were Civil War soldiers, and they were in blue. And then, as Richard said, how two Civil War soldiers ended up in it would have made more sense if they were Russians, frankly.
Right.
But if they were two Civil War, but they were in the movie as well. And again, he got to say painful. And again, he got to hold his own alongside. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen Shanghai Express, if not once, many times.
Yes.
But the ending, particularly, is just extraordinary. It's like the Cirque du Soleil of kung fu or martial arts, Hong Kong martial arts movie fighting. Just incredible. And Sammo does his brief Bruce Lee impersonation fighting Cynthia. Then you had Richard versus Yasuaki Karata. And so this kind of cemented the relationship between Sammo, Richard, and then, of course, Cynthia Rothrock. So they did other films. Cynthia, of course, had a parallel career in Hong Kong where she was doing her own movies, like Above the Law opposite Yuen Biu. She was doing her own films, but they would keep Richard and her together. And she did Magic Crystal that was directed by Wong Jing, which is the hokiest premise. It's like kind of an E.T., but E.T. is a giant green booger. And but it's the action in that film. I don't know if you've seen it.
Oh, absolutely. And they even tried to make Richard a bit of a kung fu guy in that film as well. Yeah.
Right. And he's game. He went for it.
Yeah.
It was interesting because it was one of those if you can kind of get over the wackiness of some of the comedy and the whole alien thing, and you actually look at how they made kung fu work in a contemporary setting, it was really quite remarkable.
Right.
And they allowed Cynthia to look as good as she ever did. And as you say, Richard was doing kung fu in the movie, and I mean, he came in, he goes, "Listen, I've done almost every martial art known to man except kung fu."
Right.
And there was like, "Well, this is what you're doing in this one," and I think he more or less he pulls it off.
Yeah.
And so the apotheosis globally of the Rothrock-Norton teaming was a movie called China O'Brien, which was like a contemporary Western. And that it was directed by Robert Klaus, who had kind of discovered Richard and put him in Force 5. And that was actually originally conceived as one of the follow-up films for Robert Klaus to direct with Jackie Chan, because it was anticipated that Battle Creek Brawl, aka The Big Brawl, the film that Klaus directed, the 1930s Street Fighter kind of movie, the tough man contest movie he directed with Jackie, would be successful, and then they would do other movies. And one of them was called Blood Island, which is about pirates, which later, I believe, inspired Jackie to do Project A. And then much as The Protector with James Glickenhaus inspired Jackie to do Police Story. So the same thing here, that Klaus had been going, well, we're going to do this movie set in the West. This guy comes back, and the town is overrun. He has to kind of take them on. And that was the original outline for the film. It was The Protector. It was called The Protector, but it was the storyline of China O'Brien. And because I was in Hong Kong, my first trip when I was like 19 years old, and I got like a brochure outlining the story for The Protector. It was later, The Protector was done by James Glickenhaus with a totally different story, but the China O'Brien, that outline became the outline for China O'Brien 1 and 2, which was shot back to back with this three-hander, Cynthia Rothrock, Richard Norton, and Keith Cook, who's a dear sweet guy, and if anybody should have been a star. He was a guy. He was actually, when he did a movie, when I met him on the movie King of the Kickboxers, he'd been offered a multi-film deal by Golden Harvest in the wake of China O'Brien and turned it down.
Wow.
I don't know why. Maybe you can have him on your show and he'll explain why.
Yeah, sure.
But he was, but he's a lovely guy, and he should have been a bigger star than he was. But anyway, so those movies, because they were in English with Hong Kong style action, and there's a number of movies where that's the case. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, The Matrix. That for a long time, when I was like, schlepping around Hollywood or at film festivals in Milan, trying to put movies together, I would get told by quite respectable American filmmakers, American audiences, international audiences will never sit still for all this stylized action and the wires and all this stuff. They don't want that. They just want, like Stallone and Schwarzenegger slugging it out. And I said, but that's not really a fair statement, because you've never given them the choice. To see Hong Kong action, you have to go to a Chinatown video store. You've got to go at midnight Chinatown movie screening. You've really got to go out of your way.
Sure.
And, like Stallone is playing at the multiplex. So what happened was, as soon as people were smart and they said, we're going to take Hong Kong action and put it into an American context, an English language context, when those films came out, they were almost always successful. And China O'Brien was not a big theatrical movie, but globally on video, if you can remember video, and I mean video like VHS video, it was huge.
Yes.
And in England, particularly, suddenly after that, every you remember this, Mikey, every Cynthia Rothrock movie she'd done in Hong Kong, everything ever. And then she was doing these B movies in America, and these Indonesian producers found her and Richard on the back of the success of China O'Brien and the other Hong Kong films to do Rage and Honor Part 1 and 2, which I believe was shot in Jakarta. And they were both, like, again, contemporary martial arts action films with these two. So, but China O'Brien, I mean, they're just, I believe, now being re-released, which is interesting. I mean, I think acting-wise, script-wise, perhaps they left a bit to be desired. But the Hong Kong stunt team really let these guys cut loose to show what they could do. And again, it was like, I remember there's a scene at the fairground that Richard's using the staff in a gym, Cynthia's spinning the thing on her head. And of course, Keith Cook looks amazing doing all his jump kicks. And they let them do all that stuff. This might sound to you like, well, of course they let them do it. I mean, why would you do a martial art film? Richard became a great choreographer on film. And I remember watching a movie he had done called The Condemned, which starred Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Wow.
And it's actually it was basically him on an island. They send all the prisoners on an island and they fight each other, and people are watching online and betting, right? And I watched the movie, and on the action looked, and knowing that Richard had choreographed it, and I looked at the action and I go, it looked like the DP was mainlining espresso. The camera was like this. You couldn't really see anything. It was just two guys would run at each other. The camera would shake around a bit, and then you see one lying on the floor. And I'm like, I didn't know what to say. I thought, geez, no, I don't want to offend Richard, but this is pretty shoddy. Then I happened to see the behind the scenes featurette on the DVD of Richard choreographing fantastic blow by blow stylized action for this movie that looked incredible, and it made Steve Austin look incredible. And by the way, Steve Austin, being a wrestler, could do all the moves.
Sure.
It looked great. So I'm looking at the choreography they're doing as the pre-visualization, and there's a disconnect between that and the movie. So I called Richard, and he goes, "Yeah, I spent weeks or months training these guys up and doing all the fights, the previs, and then when it came time to do it, the producers and the directors said, 'Oh, that old hat.' I think Born Identity was that the first one had come out, and it got this shaky cam thing, and the first Expendables. I mean, shaky cam is there to disguise what your actor can't do.
Right.
If they can do it, like at the end of Donnie Yen's film SPL, Sapolong, Killzone, the camera makes these very elegant movements, and everybody moves within the frame. And in fact, if you look at Jackie and Richard Norton fighting at the end of the film City Hunter, they're doing quite extended action beats. And the camera is just doing this very slow pan. You don't need it to shake because they can do it. So that was when I say on China O'Brien and the better of the, kind of like stylized martial art, foreign film, international films, American films, that it was a question that it wasn't that the actors and the stuntmen couldn't do it. It was just the director and the producers not allowing them to. Even though they'd hired these people, they just didn't get the best out of them, which I always think is a shame.
Sure.
But I'll tell you a story about Richard. Was married to this wonderful lady, and my heart goes out to her, Judy Green. Now, I don't think even Mikey probably hasn't heard of Judy Green. She was like the Vanna White of Australia. She was huge, and I'd have to go back and check, but I think when they were engaged and married, I think she was significantly more famous than him. Certainly in Australia, because she was on their version of The Price is Right, like pointing in like a I don't know, a bikini, but she was very babavoom. Still a lovely lady, pointing at all the prizes and whatever. So she was that was her claim to fame. She was the Vanna White of Australia, hugely famous, and she segued from that into doing travel shows. and she was doing one in South America, and she was in a really bad Jeep accident, and she sustained head injuries. And she came back to came back to Australia, to Melbourne, and she had memory and speech issues. And my mom, Cherie, was a key person in her rehabilitation and worked with her to recover from that injury. But anyway, so both Richard and Judy, as people, these blonde, they looked like they'd come down from Olympus. They didn't look like normal human beings. They were just these wonderful specimens. And I was in Hong Kong, and Richard called me and he goes, mate, we need to go down to the gym. Can you introduce us somewhere we can train? So they're staying in the hotel. So I went there to pick them up. Now, Hong Kong at the time, I think today, maybe you don't feel this from the films, it's quite conservative. So I opened the door, and they're both wearing super high short shorts and string tank tops. And they have the figures that would warrant dressing in this manner, like
Sure.
Mikey, the same kind of figure. And I just stepped back and said, "Oh, sorry, I'll come back when you guys have finished dressing." And they were like, "No, we're ready to go." And I felt like, when the dad says to his daughter, "You're not going out of the house like that," not that would ever happen, but it's that kind of thing. How do you say to Richard Norton, "Put some clothes on"? I was like, "All right." So we go out and we're walking through Chimsacho, which is the big, kind of bustling metropolis. And people are walking into poles and things. They're looking at this. It's like Hercules comes to New York, but it's Hong Kong. So Hercules, and they're oblivious. So we go to the gym, up the lift, go in the gym, we walk in, and everybody is just whatever exercise they were doing, they all turned to look. But I always remember that. And it was just what made it wonderful was they were not. I don't want to give the impression that they were showing off or doing it. They were just wearing what they would wear in Bondi to go to the gym or the beach or whatever. And they were just like, yeah, being that. But it was just a funny moment in Hong Kong. Made me realize that he was doing it. That wasn't doing City Hunter. I was around. I wasn't yet living in Hong Kong, but Richard invited me to come over and hang out with him here in Hong Kong when he was doing City Hunter. So I was around for quite a bit of that, which was a lot of fun. And my former friend Gary Daniels was in that as well. So he'd come up on the Rolodex, the Pat Johnson Rolodex,
Mhm.
like, hey, now it's Gary and Richard, So that was the thing. So I was there when they were filming. Actually, it was at Shaw Brothers Studio. They built the inside of the cruise ship.
Wow.
I would say that City Hunter is what happens if you drop acid while watching Under Siege. Steve.
That's a great description. It does it very accurately. So many people are confused about basics in Wing Chun Chi Sao. Some view it as a collection of moves, and masters confuse their own students by talking of principles and concepts without telling them what's what. The 15 Chi Sao Fundamentals is my attempt at explaining Wing Chun Chi Sao from a perspective of principles, but also with the basic techniques required to express those principles. It shows the framework for Hong Kong Wing Chun Chi Sao, in particular, the training of Pun Sao and Lap Da. This is necessary training before going on to the higher and more spontaneous expressions of Chi Sao. Right now, if you use the code KFG Chi Sao, you can get a signed copy of my book for the price of the unsigned one. Click on the link in the description below and use the code KFG Chi Sao at checkout to get a signed copy of this full-color, over 230-page manual on the vital foundational training exercise of Wing Chun. This offer is good while supplies last, so get yours today.
Right.
I'm sure you'll get to it, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't discuss one of the greatest cinematic gems he was part of, which was Jim Kata.
Oh, wow. Well, that was another attempt by Robert Klaus and Fred Weintraub to recapture the magic in the bottle. That was Enter the Dragon with the late Kurt the Flair Thomas. And they were trying to do like an American Jackie Chan. And Richard told me it was just so difficult because the Hong Kong acrobatic stunt guys can work anywhere with anything to achieve the effect. Kurt could only do it with Olympic gymnastic equipment.
Right, hence the pommel
So
horse in the
if you
middle of
see
the
him, hence
forest.
the pommel horse, hence the bar. He couldn't do anything unless it was like an Olympic thing. So no, yeah, Jim Carter, a masterpiece, and she's mine, Cabot. No, and it was like Richard did the choreography for that, and it was another guilty pleasure movie. It's a lot of fun. I can't believe you've seen Jim Carter.
Of course.
Great title. We should remake that one. Be
Yeah,
fun.
That'd be perfect.
But no, I remember going to Richard was shooting it was really they'd hired all of these top martial arts guys from the West and the East to make a video game called Supreme Warrior. Now, I'm not a gamer, and I don't know if this game ever came out or was successful or whatever, but they spent a lot of money on it, and they filmed it. It's the longest time because I knew a lot of the guys there. Richard again invited me to come and hang out. I wasn't involved with making it at all. But that was the longest consistent time I got to spend at Shaw Brothers Studio, which was kind of winding down. And I almost feel that was the last martial arts themed thing they shot there. And the big mistake they made is with all the money that they had to shoot the video game, if they just shot a little B movie at the same time with the same cast, that would have been more successful. That would have been like a Jim Carter. We were talking about that now.
Sure.
But have you guys even heard of Supreme Warrior?
No, but I'm also not a
No.
gamer, so that would be off my
Right.
radar
No,
anyway.
no, exactly. So, but if it had been a movie, I think it would have been, it would have stood the test of time. And then it was like, oh, speaking the other area of Richard's persona that I think only rarely, and it was more in the Hong Kong films. He was like if you look at him in City Hunter when he's playing cards, he's so funny. I mean, I think his voice is dubbed. I'm pretty sure his voice is dubbed in all versions, but his performance, his kind of like Machiavelli, he's kind of this very cold-blooded but charming villain, MacDonald, and he's so good at comedy, and he very rarely got to do that. But there's one movie. I don't know if have you guys ever seen a film called Screwball Hotel?
No, I've not.
No, well, he's a guy in there, and he plays a typical Crocodile Dundee kind of Aussie, but he's booked into a hotel room, and he hasn't booked in with a girlfriend. He's booked in with a sheep. So I hope I was actually in my copious research for this podcast, going through all the clips I could find. I found there's actually a clip of Richard and his sheep, Screwball Hotel, on YouTube. So please try to find that and put it in here just to show, because he's so funny. The scene as a whole, I mean, the first time we see him, I think what happens is another guy sneaks in. The Screwball Hotel kind of gives you what the movie is without me even telling you the story, right? A guy sneaks in thinking there's a girl in the bed and finds himself in bed with a sheep. And Richard's in the shower, like, waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda. And he comes out and finds the guy in bed with the sheep. And he takes umbrage, not at bestiality, but the fact that somebody would dare to sleep with his Flossie, that she's cheating on him. And then, these people come in, he does this whole thing. But he's so funny in the movie. And anyway, you should go back. I mean, see if you can find the whole film, but at least that clip is on there. And that was another string to Richard's bow that he never. The other movie I'm going to talk about now, we do get to see something of his comedic side, was a film he produced and starred in that was shot in Australia called Under the Gun. Have you guys seen this movie?
I have not.
I mean, it's kind of, of course, when I heard he passed, I thought about, we'd only spoken a short time prior to this, but we'd had conversations about different things. One of the conversations we had about was getting a good master copy of his film Under the Gun and restoring it and doing all these things, which I would still like to do, but I obviously it's going to be a different venture than if he was still with us, that we could do it together. But Under the Gun is this kind of like, I would say he plays a nightclub owner, and it's like a gangster action film in Melbourne, but with martial arts in it. And I was peripherally involved. Firstly, he sent me the script in Hong Kong with the idea that if I felt it, I would help him to do a rewrite. And I can remember the park I was in, reading the script, laughing out loud. It was really good. I don't know that the final film captured all the potential of the script, and I know there were some scenes that I liked that were in the script that were shot, that were cut out from the finished version of the film. But that said, I just read it as a script. I thought it was so good, so funny, so smart, and I was really annoyed because, in all honesty, I couldn't say to him, "Yeah, this sucks. I can make it better."
Right.
However, in my youthful enthusiasm, without any agreement or contract or whatever, just started talking about action scenes I thought might be fun to have in the movie. That was it. He then did. Now, the other thing that he did in the film, which is wonderful, is there's an accountant called Lau who's visible all the way through. He's dealing with this crime boss, and then at the end, he kind of dismisses our hero Richard dismisses Lau the accountant, and they have a kick-ass fight. It turns out Lau is a martial arts master, played by my dad Tino. So they had this incredible fight scene, and I think part of it was Richard felt he owed a lot to Tino, because I actually came up with somebody I was talking about today, and this is just my own personal view, and somebody else might disagree. And I think what my view is probably also in line with what we think of as traditional culture, which is if you come in as zero, you start training with somebody, and they take you to a certain level of proficiency from nothing. That relationship is a very special one. That is your real Sifu, sensei, master, whatever you want to call it. And you can later, you can go and find your celebrity teachers, or you can do whatever you're doing. But that initial relationship, do you agree, Alex? I mean,
Absolutely.
that's how I feel.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's how I feel. So I always felt that when Richard split away with Bob Jones, and Bob also reconciled with Tino later, but that Richard kind of felt everything about this is great. I'm getting to bodyguard. I'm getting to make money bouncing. I don't have to work at the airport anymore. I'm dating all these hot chicks. But I feel bad about the fact that I kind of moved away from my, adoptive father, moved away from the family. And I think him establishing such a warm relationship with me was part of kind of like coming back to that.
Sure.
And then, of course, he established a relationship with dad, and he said, I want to put you in I'm doing a movie, and I'll put you in the movie, because everybody always says, I'll put you in the movie, and then, does it ever happen?
Right.
But he made a point to do it, and it's a real kick-ass. Again, he learned from the Chinese. He was like, okay, show me what you can do. And dad did all his stuff, and he says, great, now we're going to put this in the film. And so that's what they did. And I'm so happy they got to do that. And it is an on-screen depiction of the real reconciliation between master and student, or
Wow.
father and son. I mean, recently, I think Michael Black, who helped to write Dad's best-selling autobiography, Tino. He said, that Dad has said it's kind of like losing a son,
Sure.
because I think to me, Richard was the oldest son. So that film worked on a lot of levels. I then went to Australia to see the film. I wasn't involved with making it. I went and sat there, and I see these kind of action beats, and I go, hang on a minute. And Richard goes, yeah, that was great. We put that in. And part of me now, I'm so happy. I'm not credited or anything, but I'm so happy and proud to have made a contribution to the film, a particular movie that my dad was in with Richard. And I wish I did more. I must admit, I was thinking two things. One, I should have got a little bit of a fee and a screen credit if I was going to design action for this thing. And three, I should have kept some of that stuff for my own movies. But anyway, on the back of it, I wrote a script. That movie was not Richard and Cynthia Rothrock. It was Richard and the American kickboxing champion Kathy Long, who had a brief but quite impressive early martial arts career. She did a number of films, and I think had potential as an actress. It just didn't come together for her. But she's in that movie, and I wrote a script called the original title was the film we did in the end was Blood Bond. Maybe it was called Blood Bond when I first did it, and it was going to be Richard. It's shot in Australia, and we Richard and Kathy, and this is again, all you filmmakers out there, just stay true to the original vision. I should have gone with that, because deviating from it caused me problems. And I had a good experience on the film. The film came out, was okay. We used Michael Biehn, who I was told was a bigger name than Richard. Then if we weren't going to use Kathy, we used somebody else. Of course, if I could go back in time, and particularly in these current circumstances, I would have said, to the investors, screw you, either it's Richard or nobody, and we would have gone with it. I had a thought in my mind that if this movie did well, that we could go back and I would have more. I would have had a success on the independent film scene, but it didn't do well. So I didn't get to do the film with Richard.
Mm-hmm.
And the last time we talked, I was talking to him about him choreographing an upcoming film that I'm involved with that would shoot in Australia. And I also talked with him about him being interviewed for this documentary I'm doing on my dad, Tino and Tino. So it's very raw, because it's not like somebody that I hadn't seen for a long time, and I just have more memories of him as somebody who's very relevant to what I was doing at the time. And that's the other amazing thing about Richard Norton, is that he constantly reinvented himself. He was the first guy I knew who did jiu-jitsu.
Right. So he was a very early pioneer of BJJ, especially from people from that generation. Was very rare.
Yeah. Well, my understanding was that Chuck Norris and Bob Wall had gone to Brazil, I think just on promotion for one of Chuck's films. And they had gone to the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu thing, and Chuck got choked out by Helio Gracie, who was like, I don't know, like 75 or something
Right.
at the time. And they came back and they were true believers. So I remember saying to Richard, this is a great, I mean, this line, again, you might want to cut out, but I mean, he was saying, I said, so how come after that you train with the Machados and not the Gracies? And Richard goes, well, the Machados, they're the Gracies without the jack boots. Well, I think that's probably true, because
Right.
I think there was Horian particularly. Was Horian the head? He had
Yes.
kind of
In the States,
a
yes.
kind of
Yeah.
he had kind of a my way or the highway way the way he
Yes.
was running. Machados are more laid back, so everybody gravitated to them. And Richard, highly graded black belt in Goju Ryu and Okinawan weapons, put on a white belt to start doing jiu-jitsu.
Right. It's quite
And
remarkable.
which was, tells you who he is as a person. Him and also a good friend of his, good friend of mine, Dan Santo, and you too, Alex. Both of you did, all of you guys did the same thing when jiu-jitsu came on the scene.
Right.
Put on a white belt,
Right.
hung up your ego at the door, got on the mat, rolled.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
more credit to you all. And so, yeah, up until recent times, I mean, he was doing the Mad Max revisited movies, Fury Road and Furiosa, the second one,
Yes.
training the actors, appearing in the films, choreography. He tended to be more preparing actors and training them than actually on set choreography, which I always thought was a shame. I think he was a really talented choreographer, but they tend to, unlike Hong Kong, to compartmentalize people.
Mhm.
So I think that was his main thing. He was like training people like Charlize Theron and Tom Hardy to get them ready
Scarlett
to do the film.
Johansson, yeah.
Yeah, and the most recent, instance, he was working on a film, I think the title is Mercy, with, Chris Pratt, which is a big Warner film,
Sure.
and they were the last time I met him, Taya, my daughter and I were in LA, and, I'm so glad, this came together. We've spoken many times but the last time we saw each other in person, we were on Hollywood Boulevard, and had been working on Mercy, and as it happened, Chris Pratt was injured, and so they stopped for the day or whatever the situation was. And Richard, I said, "Yeah, I can come and see you guys." I said, "Well, if you're busy, we'll do it another time. Maybe I'll see you in Australia." But he made a point of coming down, and we were in this hotel on Sunset Boulevard, and we had a great chat. I had some other friends with me. Ty was with me. We had a great, communication, just as we always do. Talk about we should this, we should that. He was always quite rightly busting my balls, like, yeah, you always talk about how great I am, like. And don't think it doesn't burn me that the last it's interesting. The last thing he did, I think, was Tiger Cops, Maria Tran's movie,
Uh-huh.
as opposed to a movie I was going to work with him on a upcoming film, and I missed my chance, but I had long enough to do it, didn't I?
Right.
So Ang Lee told me the art of cinema is the art of regret, and that'll always be one of mine that I didn't really work with Richard in an effective way.
Sure.
But I mean, looking at the end of his career, it's interesting, that he kind of like, I would say, played out a full circle, because his last movie that's been released with him in it is from Black Creek with Cynthia Rothrock, who of course was his partner on screen for so many years. And then he did this thing, Tiger Cops, where he says painful, and they very faithfully recreate all the 80s action. So he kind of like went out kind of like with the perfect lines and the perfect situations.
Right.
So, as I say, when you have the inevitable, you kind of look and say, what solace you can find. And for me, it was just that Richard lived these 5 lives in one, that he kind of left us as he perhaps would have wished. If there was no other way, he would like to leave quickly and not be debilitated.
Sure.
And that his last projects kind of were apt projects, if you know what I mean. It was like he was with Cynthia in one, and he was saying Painful in the other, in an 80s style Hong Kong film. Again, showing he got this great sense of humor,
Right.
you know,
Right.
that film
And
kind of
I'm
playing
also
part.
very grateful for I don't know if it was on that LA trip where you saw him, but you connected Richard to me because apparently he
Yeah.
had heard about my podcast and wanted to be on it. And that was a huge honor. And that was unfortunately now the only time I ever got to interact with him directly was through Zoom. But I have to say that the 2 hours that we sat and talked, I was so nervous because of who he was. I think when you meet people who were famous when you were a child, and then you meet them as an adult. It's different than if I meet someone who became famous in the last 5 years. It's like I remember reading your book, Rick Meyer's book, seeing Richard Norton, and then here I am talking to him. And for the first 5 minutes, if anyone has seen that, I'm so nervous. I'm talking fast. I'm a little, but he put me immediately at ease because his personality, you have almost no choice. He's calm, the way he speaks, he's funny, and he has all these stories that he weaves together. I'm like, wow, if I could have done so many more podcasts with him. He just seemed like you said, like he lived
Well,
5 lives, and I'm grateful to you for hooking us up together.
it was my pleasure, and I mean, and I also felt that I was doing him a favor by introducing you, so it worked out. Let me tell you my interview story with Richard. Several times over the years, I shot video interviews with him talking about his older films, and one I was talking about all the Sammo Hung, Jackie Chan movies. And I was in Melbourne, and his home actually looked like the set from Spartacus. It was all like Greek friezes on the walls and these kind of like Doric columns.
Wow.
And it just did look like, Spartacus, like made real. And so I was wearing a black t-shirt and the armpit had ripped somehow. And so Judy, who's the dearest, sweetest lady, she says, "Oh, Bey, you can't go around like that with a rip in your t-shirt. I'll sew it for you." So I take off my t-shirt and hand it to her. I'm sitting there bare chested, interviewing Richard. I mean, I don't want to look bare chested next to him. But anyway, and then she is sitting behind listening as Vanna White is sewing the armpit of my t-shirt. And that was as I say, that's the kind of familial environment that it was when you're with these people. It was just dear sweet. And I mean, the other thing is, it is so, I can speak from experience, it is so tough to have and maintain a healthy relationship um, anyway. But in this industry, I mean, I'm talking really about the film industry. I think it actually may hold true for the martial arts industry as well. But for the film industry, it's very hard. And I was always so admired and appreciated this long-lasting love affair between Richard and Judy. And it's I feel odd when I say it. Mikey, weren't there a couple of TV hosts called Richard and Judy in England? Right. So these are the other Richard and Judy. And they were a couple as well, right?
Yeah, well, no.
Right.
Yes, they were
So
a
anyway,
couple, but let's just say that Richard Norton and his wife were way cooler than Richard.
it has to be said.
Yeah.
But when so the same that I would say about Richard, the way he lived his life in movies and martial arts, in his private life, I think the same could be said. And obviously, I feel all of us, are there for Judy, and we feel in this time of grief, we need to love and support her. At the same time, I mean, what I can say from my own experience, the two of them, is that for the many years they were together, they really loved each other so much. They didn't waste any of that time. So I take some satisfaction from the fact that they found each other and saw the best of each other for those years. Now, I wasn't around. I know what went on behind the scenes, but I always felt they were very warm and close and loving. And I've been reading some of the stories and some of the recollections people have, and it seems to be fairly uniform. It was one of the great love stories of the Australian entertainment world. So that was something else, another aspect to him
Sure.
as a person. And he was like, as I say, he wasn't quite old enough to be uncle to me, but he was uncle to my kids. Like when Tyre saw him, I call him Uncle Rich. And
Wow.
I'm really, he's somebody I think who led by example. He was not somebody who was always preaching, and he was always, if he wanted to know about something. One of the last conversations that we had in any depth I had done an interview for another podcast where I talked about the background of Bloodsport and the fact that I felt that in its basic, when I first saw the movie Bloodsport, and then later when I came to Hong Kong and was in the martial arts movie world, I felt that the core of that story may have happened because there were instances when I and other people around and everybody were kind of in a situation where it felt like you could be called on or were called on to fight for the gratification of these triad bosses who might bet on the outcome. And I talked about, I had that experience in Taiwan. And then what had happened is the whole Frank Duke's Bloodsport story has gone in a whole different route. But the core of it, I thought when I heard about it, yeah, this happens in Hong Kong. Then there was another gentleman whose name I won't mention, but he's like another Hong Kong film expert who lives here, was very outspoken. Oh, Bey knows nothing. Like there's never been a Kumite or anything like it in Hong Kong. And I would know because, I'm a non-Chinese speaking white guy who doesn't know martial arts, doesn't really make film. So subsequently, Benny Akides, Richard's good friend, steps up and said, well, I was in one of those in Hong Kong when I was there making a movie. And I got to go and fight for the gangs and do that. Funnily enough, the same gentleman, when Benny said it, crickets didn't step up and say, you're on it,
Right.
So anyway, but then Richard called me the next day and he goes, tell me about these matches. And I said, he said, you're the second person I've called today. The first one was Benny to find out his perspective of it. And then I just told him what had happened and this, that, and the other. Because he knew, Richard gets on with everybody. So he knew Frank Dukes from back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
He just thought Frank had come up with this whole thing, whole cloth, and sold it to Cannon and made a film.
Right.
And Richard was around Cannon at the time because I think American Ninja
Yes.
predates Bloodsport.
Yes.
So he was already on the scene when they were doing that. And so he was somebody, he was not like, I'm going to tell you. He was more like, tell me. And we had a long conversation and I told him everything I knew and stuff I probably wouldn't say on a video interview, just talk about stuff that I've experienced in Hong Kong and elsewhere in the region. And so, yeah, and he was like, he was just going, wow, that, and he was just saying, had he at a certain time been around in his younger days, he's the kind of guy, him and Bob Jones, if they were bodyguarding somebody in Hong Kong and that came up, they would definitely have been up for it.
Incredible.
But he was kind of, also surprised. So this is another aspect of his personality, the constant questioning, the constant sense of like, I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything, but maybe you know something I don't. So let me talk to you.
Right.
When we did a Zoom webinar between my teacher, Matty J, and my father, Tino Severano, about the crossover between our Kittin-Kyun Iron Wire and the Goju-Ryu Sanshin Kata, Richard came on as a guest.
Wow.
He should have been, again, we should have done Richard Norton and Matty J. But anyway, he was on as a guest, asking questions and supporting the venture.
Incredible.
And curious. Yeah, if you go back, and we have an edited version of that available on the release site, so you can hear Richard talking and doing that. And again, speaks to the man's utter lack of ego, that he would just go, oh, like Bey's teacher and Bey's dad are on there doing this thing, and he didn't hide in the background, anonymously making notes to criticize later.
Right.
He participated in the discussion.
Incredible.
That's another aspect of him.
Wow.
And I know there's a tendency when somebody passes, and I hope you guys bear this in mind when I kick the bucket, but there's a tendency to only remember the good stuff. So please, But in Richard's case, honestly, hand on my heart, if you guys said to me, can you remember anything bad about this guy? I can't remember anything. I can't remember anything bad. Everything about him as a mentor, as a big brother figure was good. There's no bad thing about it. And I don't know there's many people of whom one could say that,
Absolutely.
present company except. There was a time, there was this, there was that, whatever. But with him, there was nothing. He was just he was just, in Australian circles, the best you can say of somebody is a damn good bloke. He was a good bloke. I don't know what they're going to put on his tombstone, but I think it should be, "Here lies a good bloke." And that was Richard.
I think that's a perfect place to end. I think that was an amazing tribute. Thank you, Bey, so much for doing this. I don't think there's anyone more qualified than you to talk about the late Richard Norton's career, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
And I hope everybody who hears this, I mean, be interested in what I have to say, but I'm just the messenger. Go back and look at Richard's film work, which is extraordinary. Particularly, go and find Screwball Hotel with him and the Sheep, and take into your own heart and mind his attitude, his open-mindedness towards martial art. Put on a white belt, do something from the ground up, constantly be asking questions, looking for new arts to train in, new things to learn, and that will be the best legacy. Better than my talking about him now. The legacy will be if you appreciate the work he left behind and you adapt his mindset in your own practice, in your own daily life. That would be the legacy I think Richard would most appreciate. And the latter rather than the former. I think he would be less concerned that people looked at his work. If people said, because of you, I did jiu-jitsu or goju or whatever, or, Okinawan weapons, that would give him great satisfaction.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bey.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys. Thanks for giving me this opportunity.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Well, hope you enjoyed that episode of the Kung Fu Genius. As always, don't forget to subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius. Hit that bell for notifications. Support us here on YouTube with memberships or on Patreon. And as always, I'll see you guys next time.
Word is I'm a kung fu genius. Technique speaks for me, not lineage. Forget Jet Li, cause I'm the one. Many call me seafood, but to you I'm sea gung. And I produce masters. You surpassed us. Your kung fu stiffer than corpse and caskets. City Wing Chun is the house I built. Violate the gate and your blood gets spilt. Alex, Richter, always the victor.
We'll see me up, all right? Because I don't have it written down. Okay. All right, peeps. Well, wait, what is the normal thing that I say? Dre always does this. All right, peeps. On today's episode of the
Dre,
Kung Fu
by the way?
Dre got COVID. All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, I will be talking to the great and mighty Bey Logan about the career of the. Hold on, let me do that again.
But that's good though. Go with that.
Yeah. Well, I figure I call you great and mighty, and then it's going to be and Richard Norton, right? But it's like about him, so I realize I front loaded it a little too much. Hong Kong movie legend, and then he'll say leg ends later, right? Okay.
Okay. It's just what I was thinking to say. Sorry. I need to get some new jokes.
Yes, I know, because I steal all your jokes, and then now I'm recycling. I need some new material, right?
Here's Sean. Sean, come and say hello to the worldwide global audience. This is my son Sean, looking increasingly like a manga.
Wow, look at that. Hair's getting long.
Manga character.
How you doing, Sean?
Is Uncle Alex and Uncle Mikey. All righty. All right, Kess.
All right, peeps, on today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, I have Hong Kong film legend Bey Logan talking about the fantastic career of the late, great Richard Norton. Stay tuned. We got lots to talk about. I'm super excited about. Jesus. I'm excited about.